Livable City, a magazine for architects, planners, designers, developers, leaders. Learn how great cities around the world make it work. Subscribe at mylivablecity.com. My Livable City, a magazine for architects, planners, designers, developers, leaders. Learn how great cities around the world make it work. Subscribe at mylivablecity.com. My Livable City, a magazine for architects, planners, designers, developers, leaders. Learn how great cities around the world make it work. Subscribe at mylivablecity.com.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, boys and girls, because some of you must be quite young, very young, compared to us. Welcome to the second Daida Global Awards event. This is the second year we are holding this event. And let me just take a few minutes to introduce to you what Daida is and what these awards are meant to be. Daida is a relatively small foundation based in the Netherlands, which has as its mission to improve the infrastructure and the living conditions of vulnerable groups in cities. We have been involved with various projects, but we are particularly concerned and we are trying to focus on educational projects. And one of the ideas which came up a couple of years back was to hold this award, an award event by which we would actually encourage master's students from around the world to take topics which are socially relevant and which in a way which will support the mission of Daida, which I just now explained to you, which is helping vulnerable groups and their living conditions in cities in the developing world. So last year, when we started this award ceremony, we had as theme, water and development. That was the theme. This year, the theme is the inclusive city, and you all have participated in it. Thank you for doing that. It's very encouraging to see that such a large group of students is actually doing master's work in totally different sort of programs, but which are relevant, socially relevant to cities. The interest, like I said, this time was very large, and the jury members, we struggled for some time trying to figure out, come to a way to shortlist you. Now, let me start by introducing the jury members. I'll start by introducing Melissa Navarra, who is from Philippines. And she teaches there, and she has about 20 years of experience. She's a sociologist. She teaches sociology there at the university. And she has been involved with resettlement and community involvement in resettlement programs prior to going into the academic world. Then we have Claudio Ascioli, originally from Brazil, I think presently in Nairobi, but otherwise based in Netherlands. He's traveling all over the place. In the last 40 years, he has worked on projects in about 30 countries, architect, urban planner by training, but very much involved with many academic institutions and other organizations, including some UN organizations. Presently a consultant. Then myself, I'm the third member of the jury. I'm an architect planner by training. I've written a couple of books on affordable housing and inclusive cities. And I am also the chief editor of the magazine, My Livable City. The fourth member here just now, he's not a formal jury member, but we are very glad to have him, and we are very pleased that he is there, and that is Mr. Jose Chong. He is of UN Habitat, responsible for the Global Public Space Program presently, also an architect planner by training from Peru, and later got also his training from Germany. So he's advisor to the jury and will also be asking questions just as a jury member in this particular session. It was a difficult task for us to go from a large list of people, because you should imagine that the students who participated had totally different sorts of theses. So they were design and they were research thesis, but there were also educational programs which are totally vastly different. So there were programs which are Master of Architecture, others Master of Landscape Architecture, governance, regional and urban planning, environmental planning, all sorts of programs which all actually are trying to make cities more livable and inclusive. After a tough time of selection, in which also some of the Daida board members who are themselves professionals in this field helped, we have come down now to a list of 12 who, what we have said, are shortlisted. So if you see that shortlist, which will now be projected on the screen. So if you see that shortlist, then you see the diversity of topics and the educational programs which are behind actually the fact that these students have taken these socially motivated topics. As at Daida, we are very happy that we have been able to inspire some of these students. And we would like now to give them a chance, the shortlisted people, shortlisted candidates, to make their presentations. 6 today and 6 in a similar session tomorrow. The idea is that each one of you students who is presenting today and tomorrow gets between 7 and 8 minutes, maximum 8 minutes. Please remember this, because we do not want to give unfair advantage to one compared to the other. So you are getting basically 8 minutes. You will get a cue at the end of 7 minutes from Akash that only 1 minute is left. And at 8 minutes, he'll cut off your presentation. So actually, please make sure you finish it within 8 minutes. After that, we as jury will have 5 to 6 minutes to ask you a question and get some answers from you. And then we'll move on after 15 minutes roughly, with some friction time after 15 minutes, to the next person. So let me start now by asking the first candidate, Rohit Aras, Rohit A, to come in and make his presentation. Rohit, welcome.
Namaste, I'm Rohit from Bangalore, India. Today I'll be presenting my thesis, Reimagining Traditional Occupations in Current Urban Influx, a case of Kempamudi Lake environs in Bangalore. To begin with understanding what are traditional occupations, these are occupations which the group of people practice, and it's transferred through successive generations. It has rooted customs and traditions into it. If you look at traditional occupations at a broader scale, they function at 2 levels. Their livelihood depends on 2 levels. One is the personal space and the extension of personal space. While the personal space is where the community lives, or the habitable space, the extension of personal space is the outdoor area where the communities are dependent on for functioning of their occupations for various reasons. It might be for work, storage, display, drying, growing, display of their products, to prepare their products, and for multiple reasons. These outdoor spaces, which were collectively used by the members of the traditional communities, were often referred to as urban commons. If we're trying to understand what are these commons, commons are a place which is open for all, and it has a shared resource which has a multifunctional characteristics and can be used by many people. And the moment it is used by the people, the space is managed and also maintained by the people itself. It has a utilitarian value which is maintained by the community who uses these spaces. But what has happened over a period of time, this common has been changed from being addressed to as urban commons to a public space. When a space is a common, it has always been maintained and managed by the group of community who's using it. But when it has become a public space, it's gone into the hands of local government. When it's a common, the utilitarian value of these resources have been taken care by the communities and they use everything that is present there. But when it's a public space, it's mostly addressed as a aesthetic or a recreational purpose space. That is what we see in most of our parks and lake surroundings these days. When most of these spaces have already been converted into public spaces, and also when we know that we can see a picture of how a single space acts when it's a common, but the same space, how it has been drastically changed to just aesthetic values and recreation when it's a public space. When we know that most of those public spaces are very much necessary for the traditional communities to practice their occupation, if we look into our formal planning areas, we can notice that these needs of the traditional communities for the usage of public spaces have not been addressed in our formal planning. So the entire thesis looks into how strategic interventions can be brought to redesign and reclaim these public spaces so that they can be connected back to the traditional communities is what we looked into. A case of Bangalore was taken. In a city like Bangalore, what becomes a common? Nature in the city itself acts as a common. By doing a broad study of different commons available in Bangalore, I broadly classified them into 4 categories. One is trees, water bodies, open spaces, and Guntu Topu. In trees, we have avenues of trees in Bangalore and something called as Ashwath Katte. Ashwath Katte is a term which I'll be using very much often in my presentation, which means a people tree and a neem tree, which is built on a huge platform, which has a snake stone and bottom of it. And coming to water body, we have lakes and tanks. Open spaces, we have green open spaces and rocky outcrops in Bangalore. Guntu Topu is a village forest which is outside a smaller settlement, which was maintained and managed by the communities who looked after it. By seeing these 4 categories, the case of Kempambudi was chosen. Again, the reason because Kempambudi is one of the oldest and the very few surviving lakes in Bangalore. And the surroundings of Kempambudi Lake, which has few green open spaces, is currently used only for recreational purposes. And it's also the city's one of the first heritage wards. When I looked into Kempambudi, though my main important aspect was the lake which was present here, when I started mapping out elements here, I could also notice the presence of other urban commons being present here. Though there is also historical temples which goes up to a history of 800 years and other things, and historical settlements sandwiched between these temples. Between these settlements, we could notice lake, Ashwath Kattes near the temples, green open spaces, rocky outcrops, and all these things. This is how the study area was defined for me to study more rather than taking a authorized boundary that is given by the local government. This is how the place looks like. When we look into the morphology of a place, we can get a clear idea of various communities moving in here. Initially, it was just agricultural practice happening around the lake, and there was just rocky outcrops here with the presence of a 800-year-old temple. Over a period of time, when there was a plague attack in Bangalore, there was this one particular community called Tigalas, who are the traditional horticulturalists of Bangalore. They moved out of the center of the city and they started settling down in areas where there was water body and open spaces. So this community also started moving near Kempambudi Lake and settling down because there was water and green open space. And once there was planned settlement happened, there is also Dhobi, or the traditional washerman community, who has come and started settling down here. We can see a drastic morphology and currently how it's been completely filled with built up area, and the lake with just one green open space present here. The entire region, I'm not able to go to my next slide here. Yeah. The entire area was studied across various layers, which included terrain, green open space, vegetation, figure ground, and land use. One important aspect we could study was the change in socio-cultural value around the lake environs. There were various activities happening before, which were currently not seen. And also another important mapping done was a social mapping, where we mapped the defined social spaces, which included old temples, ashramas, agriharas, kalyana mantapas, and also intangible open spaces, which included the procession paths along the temple and all those. These helped us identify the traditional communities which were present around the border. By doing all these studies, we could identify 6 important traditional communities, which was the Dhobi community, the washermen's community, the potters community, the weavers community, the Chapra community. Chapra is basically using coconut leaves to make a canopy sort of thing, which is used in religious ceremonies here in South India. Tigala community, who are the horticulturalists, and the Brahmins community, who settled around the important temples here. We could notice that all these communities are in close proximity to either open space or any of the urban common that has been identified. It might be open space or lake, or it might be a Ashwat Katte. These communities are somewhere in the close proximity to these urban commons. We also try to understand the change in functionality from past to present. We can notice how these communities used to function before. The Dhobis used to access the lake, it had easy access to the lake, but now they have been boundaried, where the lake bed is just used for park purposes. Yeah. Based on that, we made proposals like how we can open up the lake, where the Dhobi community can be connected back to the lake, whereas the top portion of the lake environs can be made, the urban common can be opened up by providing smaller platforms where the Chapara weavers or the potters can make use of it. We can also see how the Ashwat Katte can be opened up by making smaller platforms, which will help like a market area for the Tigalas who grow the flowers along the riverbed itself to start selling them. These were the proposals that was given. At the overall level, this is how the proposal would look like. By doing so, one thing is the entire ward is getting a new commercial hub, and also we are being sensitive towards the vulnerable communities. We are being inclusive towards the communities, and we're also being gentrifying the traditional communities present.
Yes. Thank you, Rohit. In spite of the fact that you cut off at the end, we had a good idea of what you're presenting. And obviously we have your files with us. So we have, as jury members, looked properly through it. I'm looking to see if one of the jury members, Claudia or Melissa or Jose, you want to ask a question, specific question to this particular candidate? Please raise your finger then. No? Okay. Okay, Jose, please. Jose, please.
Yes, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it was quite insightful, and I think it was quite interesting, like the relation between commons, the values of commons, and then it's like the things that you lose, like when they transfer to public space. No, so working for many years on the global public space program, it's like we wanted to have like these kind of values that you are bringing like from the commons also to the public space grounds. So I think it was quite interesting, your presentation. So maybe like only like to clarify on definitions, like how is like you, for instance, like the new definition of the public space using like the values of commons, if like you have researched that in your in your proposals, because also like when we are defining as a public space, normally like we use streets, open public space, and public facilities also as a part of the network of public space. So I was wondering more on your definition of a new public space, because at the end it's like they are open and accessible to all, like these places that you have suggested in your presentation. But also it's like how you can bring like this kind of or the mechanism like to bring all these activities or traditional activities like to the new public space, or like the extension of the commons like from the their own interior place, like more like to the public ground. So basically that's a question. Over, thanks.
So basically how I looked into was when a space is now already transferred into a public space, we can't really completely change it to an urban common. We should come to a middle ground where there is some involvement of people using it for recreational purpose also. That's what I looked into when I proposed for my lake. Though I have given space for the tigalas to start growing their flowers and opened up the lake, a part of lake for the dhobis to start washing their clothes, a part of it still can have recreational or jogging park happening around it. So there is still some middle ground happening, that the entire space is not just given out to the traditional communities, but also other people can still access it. The similar happens to the open space around the temple, where I've given smaller platforms for the potters and the chapara weavers to do their occupation. This doesn't mean that this open space is still not open for any user who comes to the temple. Still can sit on these platforms, rest for a while, and then go. This is how the space is inclusive of everyone, is how I look into it.
Okay. Can I'd like to say something, Rohit. I think I was particularly impressed by the topic itself, the fact that you looked into this issue, which actually very often gets neglected. I think that's very important. My question to you is, in the Daida Awards, we have a possibility of having something called a follow-up award, which means that if you do if you get a certain amount of money, which is the total amount is 5,000, which we have available, euros, what could you do actually on site? Now, you don't have to answer the question here just now, because I think the time is limited, but we would like you to put, because I think you have not answered that question in your application, because a lot of participants did not understand that question. The follow-up award is, that means there is an amount available to do something after this on the site itself, or something like that. So please send us an email in the coming week, what you could.
There's a small change that happened after I put up my application. If you don't mind, I can tell that.
Yes, yes.
I
please.
still
You
work.
still have a couple of minutes.
I still work in collaboration with the college, where the local MLA of South Bangalore came up with this initiative of heritage trail proposal, where we actually proposed a heritage trail which included the Kempambudi Lake and all these areas, which I've done in my thesis, where certain proposals were actually the same proposals were implemented in the proposal we gave for the MLA, and he was okay with actually implementation of few things are actually approved.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we can stop with this presentation. Thank you so much, Rohit.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best. Oh, I can't see Claudio. Yes. Okay. Claudio has a question, please. I couldn't see it.
Yeah, I put my hand, but
I didn't see it. Yes.
Yeah, no problem. Very quick. It's in line with what you just suggested. So, Rohit, you presented a very interesting analytical framework where you suggest, as Jose highlighted, a certain value of commons to lead to the redesign of the public space, which gives a more orderly use of this open space around the lake and let's say, the drivers that exist there for people to come. Now, the question is, the nature of, let's say, the common traditional space use is a little bit, let's say, informal and unplanned. Do you really believe that with this redesign that you suggest, you will increase the value and use of that space by those traditional public and all the communities that are there?
Yeah, I do believe.
And why?
I do believe the value of the space itself has been increased, because by not giving away to these communities, currently it's been just used. Let's say if it's a footpath or like a road, it's mostly used for commuting or for recreational or for aesthetic purpose. Let's say for a lake riverfront, it's mostly used as a park area. But by connecting it to these users, though there might be some sort of inorganic development that might happen, but I think we still have to come to some middle ground, which still be inclusive to these communities, because it's still a major contribution that we are giving to the vulnerable communities by doing so. And also these interventions cannot be like a prototype which can be taken out to every space. We need to understand the history of the space, whether it was connected to the communities. Only then it makes sense for us to do something like that. Otherwise,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rohit. Claudio, I'm sorry, I couldn't see your frame. I think your TV was out, the video was out. Just okay. So Rohit, thank you so much. We will move to the next person, Akash. I think the next person is Himani Chahal from
Hello everyone, myself Himani Chahal. So today I'm here to present my thesis topic on regeneration of open public space systems for the city Noida. So my work mainly focuses on social integration of urban infrastructure for achieving inclusive public realms. So through my thesis, an attempt has been made to address some of the open space disparities in Noida and how we can reintegrate some diverse components of a city back to our public realm so that people from different backgrounds they are able to engage and participate in public life. So the city of Noida is a planned industrial city located in Gautam Budh Nagar district of Uttar Pradesh, and the city falls under the catchment area of two rivers, River Yamuna and River Hindon. So, and this city was planned to serve as a counter magnet for accommodating the migrant population from neighboring cities. So as we see that Noida, it is offering huge diversity both in its population as well as open public spaces. But the issue with these spaces is that these spaces, they are very much fragmented throughout the cities, and there is an absence of center space that could help to in reconnecting these spaces. And moreover, despite being a planned city, Noida has many urban villages, and these urban villages, they are generally ignored by our development authorities, and they are not well served by quality public spaces. So the notion is how we can reconnect these fragmented spaces while integrating these urban villages and through a center system which will result in an inclusive regeneration of the city. So urban Noida has witnessed many urban transformation, both in form of land use and land covers. There are different magnets that has been introduced in the city in under different timelines, and this map shows how the spatial expansion of the cities they have resulted in the exclusion of various social and ecological components. So as a process of our urbanization, our indigenous village system, it has been transformed into a metropolitan urban system, and the value which was associated with our urban public spaces, they has been degraded. And spaces which were more open, democratic and inclusive in the past, they are now emerged as more controlled and selectively inclusive, and this is resulting in social exclusion. So different types of mapping exercise has been done for the analysis. Like this is the city's road network and transport corridor has been analyzed. So it has been witnessed that Noida has large right of ways, but there is inequitable distribution of the space on the roads, and dedicated lanes for bicycles and pedestrian users, they are not provided. And there are several navigation issues as many of the sectors, they are not connected to a public transport system. Then open public spaces has been analyzed. Then there are different hierarchies of open public spaces which can be categorized into different types and typologies. And when we further analyze the interrelationship between each type and type of public spaces, then every level of a space is connected to a higher level through an intermediate level. So a system can be identified within these spaces, and our scope work lies to identify the potential connection and network, and to identify the gap between those connections, and to facilitate the network with required infrastructure. Then mapping of social infrastructure has been done to, and different activity nodes has been identified in our city. Then qualitative analysis of the public spaces has been done with the help of certain attributes and parameters, focusing on activity levels, their interactions, their safety, their inclusiveness, and their so the analysis has been then shown with the help of different colors, which is showing their performance. So different level of issues has been identified both at the neighborhood level as well as city level. So the city is witnessing various instances not only of social exclusion but also the ecological and spatial exclusion. For instance, like significance of our water bodies, it has been shifted from front yard to backyard, and our water bodies has now been serving as a sewage dumping system. And the villages has been not integrated with the plan design principles of our city. And we can see here, like parks, they are given the gym facilities, but they fail to address the requirements of kids. And also the parks nearby the villages and open are they are not served, they are not given the required physical infrastructure. So all over the main Noida issues, they were identified as like fragmented road network systems, inaccessible spaces. The spaces along our main corridor, they are underutilized, left vacant. They are, the right of ways are focusing the more majorly of car-centric mobility. This social exclusion, lack of diversity, lack of inclusiveness. So when we, for each of the identified issues, there are some list of projects which has been proposed, like which has been again divided into 4 groups. First is the restructuring of our right of ways for having more equitable space on the streets. Then regeneration of our water systems, development of green infrastructure, utilizing our existing greens for the development of our playgrounds, and streetscaping projects. So a structure plan has been proposed where a attempt has been made to develop a central system in the city. So this is we are having a Noida drain which is flowing in the from the center part of the city. So this has been identified as a potential network which can be developed to connect different multiple nodes we have identified in our city. And for second level of intervention, these lateral connections has been provided, which will be connecting other parts and sectors of the city to the central system. So the attempt has been made to have a common ground for interaction for people from different backgrounds and different sectors of the city. So for detailed design intervention, this stretch of 12 kilometers has been selected. And as we know that rain is flowing from different sectors of the city, both planned, unplanned and urban villages. So presently these spaces along the corridor are vacant and they are perceived as invisible boundaries. So our main aim is how we can design reversible conditions that these perceived boundaries can be blurred, and we can have and through some spatial interventions we can reintegrate these lost spaces back to our public realm. As the drain is moving to different sectors, the character of spaces has been changed, and based on the character, their stretch can be divided into four main groups. the recreation zone, economic zone, cultural zone, and ecological zone. So for every zone has been given the detailed design intervention, like the yellow zone, which is a recreational zone. This zone is designed for the kids with colorful and playful elements. Then the red zone is given for facilitating the city with affordable market spaces, books market, and other type of street cafes. The blue zone has been designed as a multicultural hub where different festivals could be hosted for cities and other events, and welcoming communities from different backgrounds, increasing sociability among them. And lastly, the our spaces near.
Thank you, Himani.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Interesting one again about public spaces. Is there one of the jury members who wants to ask a question? Anybody specific? Jose.
I think
Yes,
I think
please.
Jose should do it.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes, since this is again a public space project, I will intervene. I hope my colleagues will intervene in other ones. I think it's a good presentation. It's quite interesting. Like you started like with analysis of the whole system of public space, and actually this is a thing that we are doing from Habitat side, like to analyze the whole system and to propose strategies. I was wondering, like, if you on the quality assessment that you did on the public spaces, you also consider as a typology of spaces at pocket parks, for instance, because there is a lot of activities, particularly in certain cities that happens in these pocket parks, vacant land that it can be a potential like for to use as an infrastructure and to starting some projects of intervention. And then I was interested also on the connection more on the green and blue corridors. That is this complement the micro scale and also the overall scale that can help you in this infrastructure also to do a citywide public space strategy. That is quite interesting. So I want to ask you on these topics on the inclusion of the pocket park system. But also you started with the villages. So I was interested also on the villages itself and how these villages interact with the public space system at the whole city, and also how they are incorporated in your proposal. And the second part of my question, it was more on the prioritization of the project. So if from this analysis, if you have to start in the project, you will start with the project that is the one that you propose at the end, with some architectural drawings, or what will be the priority based on your assessment. And this is important because I think for design, in some point you will need to add the participation component also to have a proper urban design of the projects. I will leave it right here.
Okay. Jose, Himali, just a moment. I'll just intervene for a moment, just considering the limited time which you have, and the questions has also taken a lot of time. But can you, particularly the first part of this question, I think that bothers me also very much. That where are the villages in this? Because you started about saying that there are many villages which were there. So what is their role? Where do you see them getting advantage of your intervention?
Sir, I have identified the central corridor, which is the Noida drain. It is flowing through the villages also, as well as other planned areas of our cities. So our main intent is to develop a central system, that is to give the villages as well as the planned areas a central shared space between these two different interfaces to interact. So when they are currently the spaces along the around villages and along the corridor, along the drain, which is left vacant, they can be regenerated so that it can serve both the villages and also villages which are spatially segregated with planned areas intentionally, and they are shifted to the backgrounds. So first, our intent is to facilitate a common space where they can interact with our other communities and they are given the space for their own social requirements.
Okay. Claudia, you had a question? No? Other?
I have, yeah,
Yes,
I have
please.
a question, Sham, and
Yes,
a
please,
comment.
please.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Himani, congratulations. I think your thesis is well prepared. It's well done. I'm at all with the illustrations, no, and also with the research, with the investigation that you did before putting out these nice designs. No, my question is about the co-production component of the design, because right now the right way of doing development, particularly if we're dealing with this common spaces, common good, for public consumption, it should be done in a co-production, co-benefits manner. So maybe I can suggest that after you already have this design, if you still have this opportunity, maybe if you get the 5,000 from from Daida, maybe you can validate. You can validate these designs with the stakeholders, particularly with the public who will be using the common spaces. Validate the designs and tweak it according to what they want, because basically they are the beneficiaries of this public spaces. And also you can build constituency behind the designs, so it's easier to push this into implementation.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
So, Melissa, it's more a suggestion than a question, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, but that's okay. I think I'm going to suggest a slight procedural change, actually, that in the time which we have available, which will announce to all the candidates, shortlisted candidates, ask them to come with another small document in which they can try to say what follow-up they can do, because many of them have not understood it well enough, which means the mistake is ours, that we have not been able to explain the question well enough. So this is fine, Himani. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
For your presentation. We can move to the next person.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vipul Kumar. My thesis topic is exploring land transmission processes in peri-urban areas, case study of Nilwal village, Delhi. My research aims to understand the impact created by shifting role of state and private entities in the land development of peri-urban areas, and this is done through examining the land pooling policy, which was introduced by DDA in Delhi. So my research focuses on three main questions. What shifts do the land pooling policy mark in the state's approach towards land development and planning of the peri-urban areas? Who are the main key stakeholders that have stakes in the land pooling policy, and what are the perceived socio-economic changes that arise as this policy gets implemented? The research was basically a qualitative case study approach, focusing on why and how the policy is being implemented, and the tools which were employed to conduct the research was basically GIS mapping, interviews, oral history, and photographic survey. So I started with exploring how does the land policy itself evolve in the case of Delhi. So the first master plan of Delhi 1962, it focused on the large scale public land acquisition, and the rationale behind the state intervention was to basically control speculation of land and to also provide the affordable housing for poor. However, as the policy got implemented, it failed to prevent the spatial segregation of poor and speculation in Delhi. And there was a huge gap in land and housing markets in Delhi. And since 2000, the ADA started exploring new land policy models, such as land pooling policy of the Amaravati state in India and the Gujarat on planning schemes. And between 2007 and 13, there was active role of the private sector in the assembling of land. And hence, in 2013, DDA published its first land pooling policy. However, there was a change in the political setup, both at the center and the state level. And in 2018, a new policy was implemented. The policy states that the private sector will play an active role in the assembling of land, and this would actually help to create world-class, smart, and sustainable neighborhoods. However, this again is being contested in the context of the peri-urban areas, as Shubhra Gururani, Simon Dubé have basically discussed in the context of the agrarian urbanism, as these areas, especially in the countries in the global south, are marked by complex local factors driven by caste, land ownership pattern, and the dynamics between different stakeholder groups. And this I examined through my case study village, which is called the Nilwal village. You can see a lot of agricultural lands are empty around the village. So this is actually located on the southwest part of Delhi in Zone L, and this was basically my case study area. This is some of the photographs from inside the village. As you can see that people are still employed in the agricultural activity. They still practice livelihood based on cattle and farm income. What I did is I basically examined the existing land ownership pattern, and I could find out that two main stakeholders groups actually own land in the area. First one is the people who actually belong to the village, and second amount of lands are majorly owned by the private limited owners, which actually constitute large builders and developers. Now, this makes a very important stake in the participation of the policy itself. My next round of the analysis was basically to see how have the villagers actually reacted to the policy. So you can see on the left side of the map that these lands are basically not as of now enrolled in the policy, because first of all, these lands are very subdivided and scattered land parcels. One owner agrees to participate in the policy, however, the other doesn't. And the policy states that small and marginal land owners who own land less than 2 hectares cannot individually part of the policy. So they would have to either form a group or they would have to collude with a large builder and developer. And this actually puts villagers at the back foot, because they say that, while they basically doing the interview in the village, one of the village elder, Mr. Rampal Singh, he told me that the farmer will not be able to sell his flats or basically do the development because a builder and a large group, the developer have better contacts and money. So he might be easily able to sell his flats, but a villager would not be able to. You can also see that the lands which are marked in red are basically owned by a single family owned person. And this has majorly to do with the caste factor, which is significant in the Nilwal village, as these are owned by people belonging to particular caste group. On the right side are the lands owned by the private limited owners. You can see that the lands owned by this group are actually lands which are consolidated on a large scale area. So they would have a better stake when the policy gets implemented. And in this map, I actually show the lands which are held by the private limited owners. And you can see that the lands marked in pink are actually held by only one major single developer group. So when the final policy gets implemented, the concerned developer group would have better stakes when the redistribution of the land takes place. So the policy states that when all the lands get pooled within a sector, like almost around 70%, the lands after the pooling would be redistributed based on certain criteria identified by DDA. And the villagers say that we don't know where would we get our lands back, because they say that the villagers could mostly get their lands along the drains or some remote sections of the area, whereas the large builders and developers would get their lands back along the major routes or the main roads. And this has basically more to do with my conclusion or my thesis research. So my first aim was basically to analyze the shifting role of state. And I can see that the state earlier used to follow a top-down vision, wherein the state would have a central role in the planning. However, in the new policy, there is a more private sector-led entrepreneurial development. And this actually requires a new form of engagement from the state in terms of providing inclusive housing, affordable and accessibility. The state has to address some of the social and equity concerns like housing for EWS, small and marginal landowners. Because if all these housing are left completely in the hands of the private sector, they would not find it, profitable to basically build for this category of people. Then my second role was basically to analyze who is the key stakeholder group in this policy. So after focusing on one village, I can say that the private builders and developers, they have a major stake in the policy itself, because the landowners, they are basically occupied by the contemporary agriculture issues. They have trust issues with the DDA and the market conditions. And also some of the proposed plans, which is already prepared by the DDA, they further speculate or the speculation process, because all these maps are easily available with the builders and developers. However, villages are not even aware about these sector plans. And this trend of speculation or the peri-urban area planning is not just limited to Delhi. It is very similar to countries in the global south, say Pakistan. Like I did some case study on Karachi. So I think this holds very important in the context of understanding the agrarian urbanism. Thank you.
Yes, Vipul, thank you so much. Very troubling conclusions, actually. Some of which I think some of us are aware of, but I'm sure Claudio has a question on this. Claudio, please. Yes.
Yes, very, very interesting and challenging topic, because if you don't have land, you can't build cities, you can't build housing, you can't live on earth. So land is about everything we do. So I'm usually fascinated by that, because there are some like George that defends one single tax that it's on land that would provide all the means for us to have sufficient, let's say, money to make good cities and decrease poverty. So you touched a very important subject. And two comments I make and one question to you. One is about, since you entering this field, it is important that you explore a much broader literature, going to sites such as the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. There is a wide range of publication there. UN Habitat has a lot of publication. So you would even explore more about the land readjustment tools, which are very similar to the land pooling in India. And this has been a very big issue in Delhi, particularly. Now, having said that comment, you suggest a private sector led, but you also identified a monopoly in land ownership by a number of speculators, because they know they can earn an enormous amount of money with land, and there is a tendency to really concentrate land ownership in just a few cases, which means excluding people from cities and from access to infrastructure. So you talked about new engagement. What do you mean by that? What is this new engagement? How do you see this as a follow-up?
Okay, so just to basically correct, I actually didn't suggest that we should advocate for the entrepreneurial or the private sector of the model of development. This is what I actually analyzed from this policy. With respect to a new form of engagement from the state. So within this policy itself, DDA is only acting as a facilitator, like the state is acting only as a facilitator. So my intervention comes in the respect that most of the villagers are not even aware about the aspects of the policy itself, like how would the redistribution of the policy going to take place? Can they actually withdraw from the policy at a certain point of time? And like who can they actually consult to when they want to submit their land or when they want to withdraw their land. So my main intervention from the state perspective is basically, at least state should make all these terms and clears, all the provisions of the policy be clear to the villagers itself. They had some of the camps within the villagers, but only once and twice, because villagers are very apprehensive, keeping in mind like how the state has previously been dealing with the peri-urban areas. They are not actually satisfied with this, though they want to give up their land because they don't find it very sustainable. But state has to provide some mechanism, some middle ground, wherein villagers can actively know about the policy itself. So this is what I expect from the state to do in this respect.
So it's about informing and educating, basically, right?
Right.
Those who do not have access to that information and who are anyway not very trustful of what the government has been doing till now, right?
Yeah, even when I entered the village, they were thinking that I am coming from the state or I am coming from some builder or developer group, because they have been multiple people coming from different stakeholders groups. So this is what we can expect, at least from the state, to do.
Yes, no, I think very interesting topic, Vipul, and good work. I cannot see Jose, but is it my mistake? Do you have a question, Melissa?
Yes, I just have a question to Vipul.
Yes, please.
I'm just curious if you already have an idea on how to navigate the state context now, because this is a study that should be influencing the land policy in that locality. So do you have any practical measures so that you can influence the policymakers?
Yeah. So just after completing my thesis in one village, this policy states that 110 villages would actually come under this policy. So I completed my study only on one village. After completing my thesis, I basically held a consultation meeting with a group of villagers who were from different village and who wanted to get some awareness on the policy itself. So I just entered into the village, a very different village, which is located just in the same zone of Zone L, where I was focusing. And I could see that people, after getting to know about the policy itself, they were better able to make suggestions, objections regarding the policy itself. So DDA has this 90 days time period wherein they would ask you to basically send you suggestions, objections. Villagers are not even aware about that. How would they going to basically say about the policy itself? So maybe facilitating through all these mechanisms, like maybe online mode of, because since state has now completely shifted towards online mode of even getting objection suggestions, and wherein these villagers find it very difficult to even convey their messages. So maybe having these physical meetings with the villagers itself, I think that would be a major drastic impact on the understanding of the policy itself, and that would basically amount to a public participation sort of thing in the policy itself. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Vipul. Thank you very much. For Melissa, Jose, and Claudio, just to let them know that the institute Vipul comes from, this Tata Institute of Social Sciences, is a well-known institute which is well respected. So I think that will help also that he is doing his master's from that institute, right, Vipul? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
So we can go to the next presenter, and that is, just a moment. So after having 3 projects from India, now we are flying all the way to South America. So to listen to Natalia Recalde Miranda of Catholic University Leuven from Belgium. That's where she's studying, but the project is in South America. So welcome, Natalia. The floor is yours.
Hello. My thesis is called Reversing Landscapes, Regenerative Forest Urbanism in the Guarani Territory. This was a product of 1 year of research in design in KU Leuven in Belgium. And my promoters were the professors Kelly Shannon and Gunnar Miller. So the starting point of this research was the study of a territory beyond geopolitical boundaries and studying different ecological and cultural layers in order to understand the process of deforestation of the Atlantic forest. That is the figure you can see in green. And so river basins, aquifers, and the multiple indigenous communities living around these territories encompassed under the name Guarani conform what we call the Guarani territory. It is actually located in the South American continent, in between Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Bolivia, so extending over vast territory. However, currently, this territory is severely damaged with the deforestation of 90% of the original Atlantic forest. And what you see in yellow is the extension of the what I call agribusiness of extraction, or the business of agriculture based on transgenic seeds of soybeans and maize that continues deforesting indigenous territories and creating huge socio-ecological crisis with the deforestation and the depletion of soils and the contamination of water. Indigenous communities and rural peasants living all around this territory are forced to migrate, to leave their lands and move to urban areas. And all of this situation is aggravated by the climate crisis that has severely increased the intensity of drought, of floods, and of heat waves in the recent years. So the next step of this research was to focus on a specific point in the middle of this Guarani territory that I call the Triple Frontera. It's a point where 3 cities joining in a tri-national urban area between Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. And this is a very interesting point because the changes generated by infrastructure in this specific point just in 50 years initiated the process of deforestation of the whole territory. So I did a study with satellite images and cartography to study this process and how urban growth and the development of international bridges and massive dams damage the territory of these Guarani communities and the biodiversity of the whole tri-national area. So for the design part, I decided to focus on the Paraguayan side and answer the question, what urban design strategies can favor recovery of damaged landscapes and a healthy relationship between biodiversity and human growth in the Paraguayan side of the Triple Frontera. So I studied specifically the peri-urban areas that are increasing rapidly in creating a situation of urban sprawl and the continued deforestation of the forest fragments. And in order to study this area, the focus was from a socio-ecological point. So I studied the topography, the forest fragments, and the land use. So in green, you see the forest fragments, and in yellow, you see the expansion of the soy agribusiness. And in dark gray, the urbanization. So there is an interesting mix of different land uses that are, it's a very dynamic territory that is changing rapidly. And indigenous communities have their territories protected all around this area. So my design proposal is as a general strategy to create a regenerative forest belt or an ecological corridor based on the existing forest fragments and the open spaces along the valleys, in order to create strategies that integrate new settlement, production, and reforestation, and creating protected environments for indigenous communities and creating new types of urbanization to stop urban sprawl. So the idea is to transform territories along this forest belt. And I decided to take another point of focus in rural area in between indigenous territories and forest reserves and waterfalls and rivers, and is also a strategic place where a new international bridge is being built that is going to have a huge impact in the transformation of this land. So it's very important to think how it will develop. And here I studied the remaining ecological structures. In contrast, the agribusiness production, and you can see how it looks, how there are no trees anymore, and how agrochemicals are used massively all around this protected Guarani communities territory. So the idea is to reverse the degradation process through landscape restoration and reforestation that also regenerates, creating agroecosystems and holistic living that take traditional ways of living of Guarani and into the urban strategies. And so for this rural area, the idea is to create, to use agroecotourism as a tool and as an initiator of a transformation process that allows to reforest and integrate native species from the forest that are not existing anymore but have high production value. And the idea is to take advantage of the topographic conditions and the scenery of the place, and to think in this landscape restoration process, and and reintegrating this in the slopes, in the valleys, and in the highlands. And so finally, through the study and cartography in different scales, a way is open to study policies and to create different ways of integrating rural and urban areas that rejoin settlement and production in a way that is living closer to nature, and that integrates human settlements and biodiversity, and in a way that that is possible to live. So this is the concept of an inclusive city in this research. These are three main sustainable development goals that are related to the research, and of course reforestation, creation of sustainable communities, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you. Before I ask the jury members if they have a question to ask, I just want to make one comment, which really I want to make. And I was amazed to see in 46 pages of your thesis a story which starts with a large scale and ecological issues of a totally different magnitude and comes down and ends with what indigenous people can actually do. Okay, so my compliments to you and to your, I think, mentors probably for the way the study is structured, that how you can, I mean, I have rarely seen studies in 46 pages which takes such a huge problem and actually comes down to something small. And fantastic graphics, by the way, very nice. Are there any questions from the other jury members? Jose, I see.
Thanks a lot, Natalia, for your comprehensive presentation. A comment and then a question. It's like actually we are working in that specific area related to a migration project. So I think it will be interesting, like also like to receive your documentation and maybe like make use of the analysis that you already did. And this is related to that because it's like I was wondering more about the migrants, because it's like we know that there is a lot of migrants, like or economic migrants, in a sense that they are changing like from country to country. So like it's very dynamic on that socio-economical aspect. So I was wondering if you analyze this issue. And the other one is like more about the value of the land, no? Because it's like this is something that is like you really need to go down like to understand the dynamics between the land value of the expansion of the city, like you said like a clash between urban sprawl and then like agricultural business and the forest, indigenous forest. So it's like I don't know if like you have in your analysis a financial and economic analysis that is like more or less that can prove that your proposal makes sense also in terms of the change of the value of the land, like to be able like to have like this urban forest. So yeah, basically these two questions. Over. Thanks.
Thank you. So in relation to land value, it's definitely a financial study that wasn't part of this research. But I did some approximations based on recent studies on the value of agroecological production and also on the value of these specific native species that have a lot of potential. So I think this is a starting point on creating policies that can help create programs that can finance and to create new cooperatives that can, I think, the association of this group of people is very important in order to create enough financial power to fight the contraposing agribusiness. But for sure, it requires a very strong study on land value and management of land uses. And in respect to migration, this specific point is very interesting because there are 3 countries there, and there is a very strong exchange between the countries in economic terms. Beyond the agriculture and more rural production. So it's definitely a very dynamic place. And migration from the countryside, from the Paraguayan countryside towards this very rural area, it's visible. I did field work and I could see how it's happening and its territory is changing very rapidly.
Okay. Any other questions from other jury members?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Natalia, I've been to that region, and as you probably know, it's a hot spot in the world for different reasons: smuggling, terrorism, economic engagements, and so on. The 3-country area. So I was fascinated by the scale of analysis you did, and coming from a very large to a very, let's say, micro scale of how can you intervene in so many areas, thematic areas. So I was curious for 2 things, and I would like you to, why did you choose the Guarani territory? And second, why the forestation issue became so important for you?
Yes. Thank you for your question. My starting point was the study of the deforestation. So this is what caught my attention, and I wanted to study what happened, how it happened, because it's a personal interest that I didn't see this forest in the landscape, and I wanted to know what happened, because it happened just in 50 years. So this was the main motivation behind it, and also personal interest in the local culture, and the understanding that this local culture go beyond Paraguay and integrates actually the whole area. So it was really a research process that by cartography I could identify these different landscapes that make sense as a whole, and so that's why it's also reforestation a strong part of the project. And also the studio that my thesis was part of is called Water and Forest Organisms. So we were really focusing in forest organism strategies in order to fight the climate crisis. So, and we learned also in the masters about this. So it was also kind of applying lessons learned during the master in a territory that I'm part of, let's say. And also this tri-national area is very interesting because of all the urban dynamics that are going on. But I try to give it like a different perspective and analyze from these vulnerable groups that are not often the main point of study when you think of this area. But it's actually a very big issue of rural migration and the threat of indigenous territory that is going on just there. It's part of the metropolitan area.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your answer. Actually, it's very interesting that the question that Jose raised about the land value and etc. I was just thinking that the previous presenter, Vipul Kumar, should team up with you, and you two probably will have a have an answer to that. Because, okay, thank you so much, Natalia, for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Can we have Can we have the next person, and that is Akruti Murekar from SPA Bhopal.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Akruti Murekar, and I'll be presenting my thesis, addressing climate equity in planning through citizen science. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Akruti Murekar and would be presenting my thesis titled Addressing Climate Equity in Planning Through Citizen Science. So, the ongoing reciprocal action between climate change and urbanization has led to several resource distribution conflicts, which are evident in cities. The research focuses on climate equity that refers to combining the concepts of environmental justice and also social equity. It means addressing the inequities, enabling the society to equally share the benefits and to achieve equitable access to services. After that, planning with equity concerns means to move towards a transformative approach and requires to build linkages across sectors, scales horizontally and both vertically. So the actions required to address equity are inclusion and equity in terms of plans and actions, knowledge, data, and partnerships between government and the civil society by devising and applying inclusive assessment matrix, and finally robust, accountable, informed, and equitable institutions. To address climate equity, a comprehensive set of indicators for local action is required using mixed quality and quantitative methods for mapping vulnerabilities and develop a robust adaptive capacity. For this, a contributory framework of citizen science would be essential for inclusive development. With a comprehensive set of goals, the SDGs demonstrate its commitment towards inclusivity and resilient communities. This study delves into suggesting a contributory framework for localizing the SDG 11 by employing citizen science tools, ensuring civic engagement, and understanding local level concerns with equity assessment, which essentially translates to acknowledging underlying inequalities and addressing equity. The research design developed to incorporate climate equity concerns in planning requires an inclusive approach towards equitable planning with vulnerability mapping, public engagement for assessment, and SDG implementation at the local level. This would result in multi-stakeholder initiatives, reducing vulnerabilities, building resilience and capacities with intermediate outcomes of strong capacities and a participatory approach in planning, leading to long-term outcomes of addressing climate equity. With the aim being recommending a framework to address climate equity by localizing SDGs using citizen science, there were 4 objectives that were developed to fulfill the aim. The first objective was to understand the climate equity concern and its indicators. Comprehending from the literature, the indicators chosen were based on 3 focuses, namely equity, society, and climate, that translate to physical vulnerability, social vulnerability, and the status of SDG 11 targets. Then the tools and techniques were identified for disseminating the knowledge and act as an open data portal for citizen science. This was followed by the development of computation methods for the selected indicators for the assessment at the local level, and then the assessment was conducted based on these indicators through primary data collection in the form of citizen science surveys, and secondary data as well. The selection of the study is based on the SDG India Index score. The Navi Mumbai Municipal Corporation was selected as the study area, and the final objective was to develop the SDG localization framework for integrating climate equity concerns in planning. As mentioned earlier, the study area, the state of Maharashtra, in which the city of Navi Mumbai lies, has a score of 45 in the SDG 11 index. So the study focuses on a comparative analysis of the 8 administrative wards within the city. So beginning with the vulnerability assessment, there were several indicators identified within the factors that define physical and social vulnerability. Factors of housing, physical infrastructure, risk to hazards, and water resources define physical vulnerability, and those that define social vulnerability are demographic status, economic status, and social security. Mapping of these factors and conducting an overlay analysis presented the results as wards with physical and social vulnerabilities ranging from the lowest to highest. Then the assessment to understand the status of SDG 11 in the study area was conducted with these indicators, and the computation methods were developed. The mapped indicators are proportion to population living in slums and informal settlements, proportion of population with convenient access to public transportation, land use efficiency, proportion of solid waste coverage, air quality, and the proportion of population with access to open spaces, along with the per capita green space. To To collate the values and calculate an average score of each ward, considering all the factors with equal weightage, the values have been assigned from 1 to 10, being 1 being the lowest score indicating highest priority level, and 10 being the highest score indicating the lowest priority level, and the wards were then ranked. So understanding the linkages with the indicators and the vulnerability factor, it was all very interlinked. And then a phase 2 was assessment was conducted, out of which based on the phase 1 assessment. Phase 2 of the assessment focuses on specific priority areas and identifying the communities of concern, and certain recommendations were developed for the implementation of SDG 11 targets for better service delivery and planning. These SDG targets were relinked to the existing schemes aligned for development and implementation of the targets that can be achieved by phasing out the development. By preparation of local area plans and relinking it with the existing national level schemes, the implementation can be undertaken. For example, target 11.1 can be linked with the PMIY urban and other respective state level schemes as well. So the framework for SDG localization has been developed by identifying the steps aligned with the state level, which broadly divide into 3 parts of awareness, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So the steps at the local level identified are basically to raise awareness and advocate the active role of local actors, then developing city level indicator frameworks, and the improvement of data collection by using citizen science, and also reducing the periodicity of the data that is collected, and then the periodic ranking of wards on SDG performance, and also the vulnerability performance for identifying priority areas. These stakeholders identified are urban local bodies, ward committees, planning institutions, local SDG center, which could be created, academia, NGOs, civil society organizations, and citizens, along with the functions ranging from preparation of local area plans, considering the assessment results, and also data required for monitoring and implementation of the goals. The contribution of citizen science for SDGs has also been developed as a part of the framework and would be mechanized by creation of a data portal for data entry and validation of the same by the local SDG center. So cities, as we know, are processes the processes in cities are dynamic and they undergo changes. So city sensors and citizens witness this dynamicity and are carriers of information. The data strategies, along with this additional knowledge transfer mechanism with citizen science, can supplement the data decision-making processes in the domain of not only urban planning, but also resource management, disaster risk resilience, and overall urban resilience. To achieve the SDGs by ensuring civic engagement and understanding local level concerns with the help of equity assessment would essentially translate to acknowledging underlying equalities and addressing equity as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Akruti. Thank you for your presentation. That was a lot of information, and the graphics, I would suggest that when you go forward, if I may suggest, could be a little more clearer, because when you put everything together in the same way, a lot of information in I found that with your thesis also, the graphics could be improved.
Yes.
Subject is interesting. I have one question, and then I'll leave the floor open for others. Does this, your studies about how information, which, if I understand rightly, that you're saying there's climate inequity, and part of the way of solving it is by getting information back, feedback from the citizens regularly, right? And yes, when you talk about citizens contributing, is the information, it's always digital, is that right? So, I mean, do you take for granted that everybody is digitally savvy? All the citizens?
No. No, not at all. Definitely digital literacy and digital access is a major concern as of today. For basically we first get a mechanism in place. This could be the primary data while with people being employed on the ground and collecting data from the people. But later on, as we have digital access and digital literacy over the few years, maybe have a passive data collection mechanism per se, but not as of now. Right now, even for the thesis that I had, I did not data based on digital. However, certain 20% of it was digital. The rest, everything was public consultation on a non-digital aspect.
Okay. Anybody else questions? Yes, Melissa. I see Melissa saying something.
Yes. Thank you, Akriti, for an interesting presentation. And I agree with Sham. No, your presentation is the slides are quite busy, so you can improve on that later on. My question is about the SDGs, and why did you only focus on SDG 11, which is about climate change, no? When in fact you're trying to address the imbalance, no, in addressing climate issues and also addressing social issues, particularly housing adequacy, access to power and water. So I'm thinking, why didn't you balance it, the SDG 11 with SDG 1, no? And you also have access to water, power, sustainable cities, no? So that it's a comprehensive look, no? It's not just the lens of climate, no, but also these other lenses that are quite related, quite intertwined in the issue that you're addressing.
Yes, definitely. I do agree with what you pointed out, and I try to link these like, so SDG 11.1 links to SDG 2 and SDG 1 as well. So I just because the duration of the study was much limited, I couldn't do the entire or conduct the entire analysis, but I identified these linkages of interlinkages between the SDGs, and also its linkages with what could be done in the vulnerability assessment. So to categorize all the other linkages, I did the physical and the social vulnerability, but I didn't have the time enough to focus on the other SDGs as well. Hello.
Yeah, thank you, Akriti. Yeah, maybe later on in your PhD.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, sure.
Jose or Claudia, any special questions? Others will move on to the last presentation. Oh, Jose, you have one. Yes.
Yes, no, a very quick one. I was, well, data gathering and an analysis of information is one of the key issues, like when we are talking about SDGs indicators. And actually, the data gathering and the frequency of the data gathering is like it is something that we are even struggling like to get like from cities. So I was wondering, like first of all, like more on the recommendation side, like from the conclusion that you had on your from your analysis, like you did a prioritization of like key priorities, like that you found in your on your analysis, because I think even like local governments are struggling like to implement the recommendations that they can find like from this big analysis. So it's like maybe like there are some that has more impact, and this is something that maybe like is related more with the title of your presentation, that is climate equity. No, so I was missing more like the climate equity analysis on the SDG analysis that you did, particularly like focusing on SDG 11 that is focusing on cities. No, so maybe like I was wondering if you have this prioritization, and maybe like how you can share that information, maybe like with local offices or like with the local government, like in order like to implement your recommendations. Over.
Yes, definitely. So ULBs or local organizations are somehow lacking the manpower also and the capacities to, first of all, the very first step to identify the problems or the priority areas and then to implement them as well. So not only in terms of data gathering, but also while implementation and monitoring, that was the idea, that citizens could play a role, and the civil organizations or the NGOs, other than basically the local government, they could play a role in the implementation of SDGs and monitoring and evaluation through their lens as well, because that is something that is not being tapped into. And the whole idea was SDGs at a broader level are being addressed in a way, but when you trickle down to the ward level or to the micro local level, that is somehow the knowledge dissemination or the implementation factors are not in place. So that was the gap to I try to tap into.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Akriti. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go to the last presentation for today. And that is, we'll be flying for the project to the African continent. So Leticia Owusu, welcome from
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leticia Owusu, and my presentation is on the impact of gated community development on the quality of life of local residents, a case of Accra City, Ghana. The main focus of my thesis was to assess how gated communities in peri-urban areas in Accra City impact the quality of life of local residents living outside of the gated community. So to begin with, I asked myself, what are gated communities? And these are closed residential developments that are voluntarily occupied by a certain group of people that share common values, that share common socioeconomic values, where public spaces are prioritized. So with this type of development, non-residents are restricted from accessing these areas through the employment of security devices like fence walls and hedges. So why then do they matter? They matter because globally gated communities are rapidly increasing in our cities due to its potential impact that it has on the well-being and quality of life of people. These type of developments are linked with social inequalities and residential segregation. So the images show how one half lives in our cities and how the other half also lives within our cities. However, planners and developers in most global South cities sees gated community as the ideal way to ensure equality in our cities and improve integration within our societies. So by leveraging on this type of development, they build our ideal cities but fail to consider the needs of the local people that will be affected by this type of development. So therefore, in this study, the mixed method approach was adapted and we made use of both secondary and primary data. So the image shows focus group discussions that were organized within the study area in order to get some of the primary information from the people. To be able to answer the main objective, some questions were asked. I try to ask myself, what are the driving factors or factors that drive these developments within our areas? And I found out that the Land Use and Spatial Planning Act, plus the National Housing Policy, coupled with the land tenure system, which is being practiced within the area, supports gated communities to develop in the city. Also, land availability and its affordability also drives these type of development into the peri-urban areas. So the image shows how the study area looked like as of 2010. That is where large undeveloped lands, and now these areas have been built up, as shown on my right-hand side. Then the next question I asked myself was, how does this development then affect the quality of life of the local people? The finding shows that generally, the overall quality of life of the people improved after the development of the gated communities. The study went further, zooming by studying the social, economic, and environmental conditions of life. And the study found out that all these areas have been impacted both in the positive and the negative way. So for instance, looking at the economic conditions of life, the local residents saw an improvement in this area. They saw an improvement in this area. That is to say that when these developments arrived in the area, it had opened up the area and attracted a lot of development, a lot of businesses into this area. So hence, they attested that it has increased the employment opportunities within their communities. Another area where they saw positive influence was in terms of their safety. The map shows the level of dissatisfaction of the local people before the development of the gated communities and after the development of the gated communities. These residents perceive that their safety has increased because after the development of the gated communities, a lot of infrastructures like street lights have been brought into the area. A lot of bushes, which initially serve as havens for criminal activities, has also been cleared, increasing their level of safety within the area. An interesting thing was that those that were very close to the gated communities felt more satisfied as compared to those that live a bit out further away from the gated community. This was as a result of the daily police patrol within these areas and also some of security checkpoints which are built within the communities. On the other hand, the other parts which were affected were their accommodation costs. Residents felt dissatisfied after the development of this gated community. As a result, that the rents within these areas have improved or increased, and this has led to the displacement of some people or the low-income people who cannot afford the high rent to move away from the neighborhood. Others has also moved into wooden structures, as shown on my right-hand side in the image provided. Another area where the residents felt dissatisfied was also in terms of their access to open spaces and green areas. The local residents felt dissatisfied with how they access these amenities after the development of the gated community. This level of dissatisfaction was higher among the local residents that live further away from the gated community. This is because the lands available within these areas are relatively cheap as compared to those that are close to the gated communities. So much people moving into these areas are able to afford the lands within those far areas, and a lot of developments are taking place, leaving no spaces for green areas or open space or public open spaces. So then, to conclude my presentation, I'll then go on to ask myself, how does my topic become relevant for inclusive cities? And I'll see that contrary to the popular views of gated communities, depending on the location of the gated communities development, the opportunities that they provide for the local environment and the economy, how they are integrated with the local environment and the people, these developments can be beneficial. So in this case, I can make reference to the social and economic conditions of life as discussed in slide 7 and 8, where the people are able to get a lot of employment opportunities within their area upon the arrival of the gated communities. Their security is also improving after the development of these gated communities. So with this research, I propose the involvement of the local residents in the environmental social impact assessment process. This will help the stakeholders or developers and planners to be able to identify the needs of the people within these areas and help them to develop the gated communities in a way that will ensure improvements in their quality of life. Also, I recommend that government should develop proper strategic policies that will prevent the displacement of low-income people from their neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Leticia, and thank you for finishing within the time limit.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm looking at the jury if there is a specific question which somebody wants to ask. Maybe Melissa, this is something which is for you interesting about how because you're concerned about what the people directly involved, what they think about it. And this study is about that, is it not?
Oh, yes. So this one for me is pretty interesting, especially I've known that in other parts of the world, mixed neighborhoods doesn't work. Like in US, they have this the Hope project wherein they resettled different families, but then they didn't like because for them, mixed neighborhood just intensified the inequality. So they left the neighborhood. No, but then in this case, it has spun off into employment, also into income opportunities for the families outside the gated community. But then, yeah, my question is, what has been the policy of the local government, and also the national government in terms of because for me, it's a sort of gentrification, this one, where you convert the land, and then you gentrify it and you construct an exclusive subdivision, and it's actually the commercial interest of the developers, which later on, right now it's okay, because it's generating employment, but then it will reach a saturation point that the employment will not be enough, for the families living outside the gated communities, and this gated community can expand and then later on ease out these families. So what has been the policy of the local government and the national government in terms of land reclassification, and also in putting up exclusive subdivisions in this kind of landscape, wherein you have different types of residents now coming from different socioeconomic status?
Yeah, thank you very much. The policy within this country is looking at the Land Use Act that we have. It gives the government, or let's say the planning authorities, the power, the use rights over these lands. However, the land tenure system that we practice gives the individual people, or let's say chiefs or families that own these lands, the power to decide what they want to use these lands for. So meaning that though the Land Use Planning Act is there, because of the type of land tenure systems which is being practiced, there's always a conflict between as to which one is the best use that this land has to be used for. So in order to be able to break this kind of conflict, there's always the opportunity to bring both stakeholders together, because as an individual owning a land, I have the right based on the act to apply for rezoning. So the government can reclassify these areas in order to ensure equality within the area. But because of the land tenure system, the owner or the families which own these lands can also request for a rezoning, and these areas will be changed. So in order to be able to ensure that these families are not displaced from the area or from the community, there's always the need to involve all the stakeholders, that is the planners, as well as the families or the owners of these lands, in order to be able to develop. So in this way, if you're able to understand what the people need, it will help them develop the gated community, but by not displacing the people from the community. Yeah.
And that policy is not yet present, I suppose.
No, that policy is not yet present. Yes, basically. So they have fragmented policies, and so it's up to us. It's now time for us to move and now involve all stakeholders together and bring it together, making it one, and that will help us ensure an inclusive way of developing our cities without displacing the poor from it. Yeah.
Claudio, you had a question. Thank you, Leticia. Claudio had a question.
Yeah, Leticia, you presented a very interesting combination between sorry?
That's okay. Akash, that's okay.
Look, that's okay.
Yes.
Anyway, you combine the household survey with aerial mapping survey, which actually is the core of gated communities. And as Melissa said, we know a lot about gated communities today, and the type of segregation, spatial exclusion from those who can afford, create a bubble within the cities, and where she lives, it's packed with almost a city within a city in some areas. And we see a lot of these popping out in Latin American cities, including urban poor making their own gated communities for safety or for other reasons. Now, you suggest a pro-poor strategy, and you suggest that the interventions of bringing those people with higher income, let's say income, who can live in those gated communities, are having a spin-off impact on the surrounding communities or residents. One providing income, on the other one is providing higher costs of living because the neighboring area gives a certain value. So how do you see this pro-poor strategy that you propose?
Thank you very much. So with this proposed strategy, as I said, when these developments comes in here, more people moves in and the values within these areas changes, meaning that the economic status of the people living within this particular area also increases. Meanwhile, already before the arrival of these developments, there were low-income people that were living in the area. So when these developments comes in, and they provide a lot of employment opportunities for them, it helps them now. All the family members or members within the family are able to get employment or get something to do, a job or something to do, which also contributes the family income that they have or the household may have within the area. Therefore, so when government comes in to put in some strategies, this proposed strategy in terms of, let's say, let me use an example like the housing scenario. When these kind of affordable houses are also developed for these type of people, it will help them not to be displaced from this community, but also be able to stay in the community and enjoy the benefits that this development brings into their neighborhood. Okay.
Right, it's quite paradoxical in that sense, but thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Leticia. With that, we come to the end of today's session, and thanks to all the 6 participants who presented it and their professors and mentors who led them to these studies. And thank you so much for the jury members, and especially also to our advisor, Jose Chong, who has also spared his time to be present here from UN Habitat. We'll be back tomorrow again at the same time as we started today, to then to listen to the other 6 participants who have reached to the final stage. Thank you so much. Goodbye.